It all started with a post on a subreddit dedicated to eerie, unexplained events. Jane, a 32-year-old freelance writer, stumbled upon a thread titled, "What's the creepiest thing that's ever happened to you?" The top comment recounted a chilling tale of a shadowy figure appearing in a family's home. Intrigued, Jane began diving deeper into the thread. Many of the stories were likely embellished, but some carried an unsettling air of authenticity. One story stood out. A user described a house in a rural part of Maine that was infamous for unexplained disappearances. The house, they claimed, was once home to a reclusive family known for practicing strange rituals. Jane's curiosity got the better of her. She bookmarked the thread and spent the night researching. As the hours ticked by, she found more mentions of the house, each story more ominous than the last. The house was real. Located in the middle of dense woods, it had been abandoned for decades. Locals referred to it as the Whispering House, named after the strange murmurs visitors claimed to hear around it. Despite the warnings, Jane's writer's instincts kicked in. This was a story begging to be told. A week later, Jane packed her car and drove to Maine. She told herself it was just research for her next big project. But deep down, she felt an unexplainable pull toward the house. The drive was uneventful until she reached the outskirts of the small town near the house. The atmosphere shifted. The air felt heavier. The trees seemed to loom closer to the road, and the sunlight barely penetrated the canopy. Jane checked into a modest motel and spent the evening chatting with the locals at a nearby diner. When she mentioned the Whispering House, the mood changed. Conversations ceased, and all eyes turned to her. An elderly man, Hank, finally spoke up. "You're better off staying away from that place. It's not just stories, miss. People go missing out there." "Missing how?" Jane asked. Her curiosity piqued. "They go in and they don't come out," Hank said grimly. Another local chimed in, describing eerie sightings of lights flickering in the windows, shadows moving despite the house being abandoned. Jane's skepticism faltered, but she dismissed their warnings as superstition. She thanked them for their concern and returned to her motel to plan her visit. That night, her sleep was plagued with vivid dreams of the house. She saw herself standing in its decayed living room, a figure watching her from the shadows. When she woke, her sheets were damp with sweat. The next morning, armed with a flashlight, a camera, and a notebook, Jane set off for the house. The road leading there was overgrown, forcing her to park and walk the remaining distance. As she approached, the house came into view. It was a crumbling two-story structure, its windows shattered, and its paint long faded to a sickly gray. The trees around it seemed unnaturally twisted, their branches clawing at the sky. Jane hesitated at the threshold. The air around the house was unnervingly quiet, devoid of the usual forest sounds. She stepped inside, her boots crunching on broken glass and debris. The interior was worse than she imagined. Graffiti covered the walls, and the floorboards creaked ominously under her weight. She began documenting her surroundings, snapping pictures and jotting down notes. The house was eerily cold, and Jane found herself constantly glancing over her shoulder. She explored the first floor, finding nothing but decay and rot. Then she moved to the staircase. Each step groaned as she ascended. The second floor was darker, the windows covered in grime. She entered what appeared to be a bedroom. The walls were covered in strange symbols, and the floor was littered with candles melted into grotesque shapes. A chill ran down her spine as she realized the room looked exactly like the one from her dream. Jane's camera malfunctioned when she tried to take a picture. Frustrated, she gave up and began sketching the symbols in her notebook. As she worked, she heard a faint whisper. She froze, straining to hear. The whisper grew louder, but she couldn't discern any words. Her flashlight flickered, plunging her into momentary darkness. When the light returned, she saw it. A figure standing in the corner. It was tall and impossibly thin, its face obscured by shadows. Jane's breath caught in her throat. She stumbled backward, dropping her notebook. The figure didn't move, but seemed to radiate a palpable sense of malice. "Who are you?" Jane managed to whisper. The figure tilted its head, the motion unnaturally jerky. The whispers grew louder, filling her ears. Unable to take it anymore, Jane bolted. She raced down the stairs, nearly tripping in her haste. She didn't stop running until she was outside, gasping for air. Back at the motel, Jane tried to rationalize what she had seen. Maybe it was a trick of the light, her mind playing tricks on her. But when she opened her camera, she found a single, chilling photo she didn't remember taking. The shadowy figure standing in the bedroom, staring directly at the camera. Jane decided to leave town the next morning, but her ordeal wasn't over. That night, she woke to the sound of whispers. Her room was freezing, her breath visible in the air. She turned on the light, only to see her notebook lying open on the desk, the pages filled with writing she didn't recognize. The symbols from the house were scrawled across every page. Panic set in. She grabbed the notebook and fled to her car. As she drove away, she glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the shadowy figure standing at the edge of the motel's parking lot, watching her. Jane never wrote about the Whispering House. She deleted all her notes and photos, determined to put the experience behind her. But the whispers followed her. At night, she would hear them, faint but persistent. Objects in her home began to move on their own. And sometimes in the corner of her eye, she would see the shadowy figure, always watching. Desperate, she reached out to the Reddit community, posting her story in the same thread where she had first learned about the house. Responses poured in, some offering advice, others sharing similar experiences. One comment stood out. "You've brought it with you. It won't stop until it gets what it wants." Jane replied, asking what it wanted. The user's response was immediate and chilling. "You." The whispers grew louder, the figure more frequent. Jane's mental state deteriorated. She stopped going outside, her once vibrant career left in ruins. Weeks turned into months, and Jane's friends stopped hearing from her. One day, her neighbor noticed a foul smell coming from her apartment. The police were called. They found Jane's lifeless body in her bedroom, her face frozen in an expression of sheer terror. The walls were covered in the same symbols from the house, drawn in what appeared to be her own blood. Her death was ruled a suicide, but those who knew the truth weren't convinced. Her Reddit account was active days after her death, posting cryptic messages and linking to new threads about unexplained disappearances. The Whispering House remains abandoned, but its legend grows. New Reddit threads discuss Jane's story, each adding their own theories and speculations. And some users claim that if you visit the house, you can still hear her whispers, begging for help. Begging